In this video, we will be tasting and talking about batch 89 of the Eco-Cha Tea Club, an early spring Luo Chun Green Tea. Batch 89 of the Eco-Cha Tea Club is an early spring Luo Chun Green Tea. Luo Chun is a historical tea from mainland China. It was a tribute tea to the emperor during the dynastic times of China, hundreds of years ago, and was brought over to northern Taiwan and is specifically produced in Sansha, which is a district in the Taipei, greater Taipei area in northern Taiwan. And it's also specifically made with a cultivar named Qing Xin Gan Zai. To my knowledge, personally, it's the only area that grows this type of tea tree. And it's a very hardy tree that can withstand picking the leaves at a very young growth stage, basically less than half mature, and continually picking them throughout the year. Most tea plants couldn't handle that stress of continually having their new growth picked. But these trees seem to deal with it, and this allows us to have a very tender leaf bud and immature leaves, and that will produce a kind of peach fuzz that is the protective coating on the new leaf bud. And so if you see floaters in your tea, that's naturally occurring and it's not harmful at all. And it's actually, people consider it to be flavor enhancing. So without further ado, I did 1:18 ratio. So I did 10 grams of tea leaves in this 180 milliliter Gaiwan teapot. And I measured the temperature, given this is a green tea, with an immersion thermometer. If you don't have a thermometer, you can do a simple method of pouring the water, if it's close to boiling temperature, pour it into a pitcher first, let it sit for half a minute or maybe a minute if it's at boiling temperature. Ideally, you want to get it down to about 85 degrees. Some people say that you should brew Luo Chun at much lower temperatures, as low as 70 degrees. We find this tea to be able to handle it, and we like to bring out the flavors as much as possible without pushing it too far and making it bitter or astringent. So we found 85 degrees, 1:18 ratio for about 30 seconds. We did the first brew for 30, second brew for 30, third and fourth brews for 40, and then the fifth brew for a little bit longer. The tea has cooled down by now, and I'm already thirsty, so I'm going to have a sip. It's for every time I have the first sip of this tea, it's a simultaneous experience of soothing and refreshing. There's something really soothing about it. It's soft. It's almost like those really tender leaves are transmitted into the flavor of the brewed tea. It's vegetal. It has the classic note that is that describes this tea in Taiwan is Lü Dou Xiang, which is mung bean fragrance. Mung beans are almost, I've only seen them eaten as a cold soup, a sweet cold bean soup. That's how mung beans are prepared in Taiwan. So the sweet and the cooling effect of this bean soup that's typically eaten or drunk during the hot months is refreshing by itself. And that aspect, it's more than just, it's not a green leafy, there's something more substantial to it. Like the essence of bean coming through in a soup. So you have, there's sugar added to the soup that they make the beans from. Beyond that, there are delicate herbal notes. I won't even try to really describe. I would say a very mild, savory, kind of fresh, definitely fresh herb. It pops a lot. And at the way we just brewed it, I find it barely astringent, just enough to allow the dry finish to allow the flavors to pop as you swallow the tea. Third brew, it got thicker along the way between 1, 2, and 3. I'm going to go back to 2 for a second. That's pretty thick too. It really does have substance. One of the things that our source does, which is unorthodox or at least varies from the original method of making this tea, is to allow the tea leaves to wilt overnight. So as I understand it, Luo Chun, historically, the very tender leaf buds are picked and they're brought in and they're exposed to high heat to cease oxidation as soon as possible, or basically prevent the leaves from oxidizing at all, to really capture that completely fresh green quality, which produces a very fragrant aromatic brew, but with not a lot of body. There's not a lot of legs in the traditionally made Luo Chun, and it can be quite green or even green grassy flavored. And our tea makers that we source from have found that they just like it better, and it's a more consistent and reliable quality and profile, flavor profile, when they allow the leaves, they spread them out very thinly so they're not piled at all, and they just sit overnight and slowly start wilting, basically. And it's hard to say if that's oxidation. Normally in an oolong making process, the leaves wilt exposed to sunlight. Infrared kind of kickstarts that process of wilting. Then they're brought inside and they're intermittently shuffled. And that shuffling is quite important to keep the circulation going. But it's hard to compare because these leaves are so young and tender, and they're probably more delicate and they transform more quickly. So they're just allowed to sit for up to 18 hours before they are slightly shuffled and then put into a tumble dryer to expose them to high heat. And they are rolled gently, and then they're put through another type of conveyor belt dryer twice to completely dry them. It's a very simple process, but it's very reliable. It's amazing. We really feel like this tea is one of the most consistent qualities of all the teas we source. Yeah, so in my perception, it's that wilting process that brings the green grassiness down into a deeper green, a more full-bodied flavor profile, and gives it substance, gives it a mouthfeel. It's quite smooth. You really have to kind of imagine bitter to even taste it. It's not something that occurs to me offhand while drinking it. There are bitter and astringent qualities to it, but it's definitely layered with enough sweetness and substance. It's really, it's quite addictive. You want to keep tasting that flavor. Okay, I just took the fifth sip. It's definitely, it's getting a little more delicate now, but the body, the smooth and kind of the mouthfeel is still there. It's just a little bit less full flavored than, yeah, I think it peaked at the third brew here. Yeah, that's definitely the most substantial. It is when I boosted up to 40 seconds, and beyond that it was 40 and 45 or 50. So, in the brewing methods, it is a bit of a delicate tea, more delicate than oolong teas, which are fully matured leaves and they're tightly rolled and more processed. So you do want to pay a little bit of attention to the temperature. Just bring it down, somewhat significantly from boiling. 90 degrees I think is enough, Celsius of course. And the more important factor is timing. So you don't want to brew it for too long. These leaves steep easily and will get bitter more quickly than fully mature leaves. So the ratio, if you don't want to brew that many brews, so this, 180 milliliter pot times 5, that's close to a liter of tea brewed. If you don't want to drink that much tea, use less leaves and brew it less times. And if you want to brew in a bigger container than a pot, like a French press or a mug, then lower the temperature more. That's another factor. So basically, as you decrease the ratio of leaves to water, you want to decrease the temperature of the tea and increase the brewing time. For example, if I took 5 grams of leaves and brewed them in 100 or 150 milliliters of water, I would probably go down to 75 degrees and brew it for like 3 minutes for the first brew, and then see how we go from there. roughly. You know, it's all for you to experiment with and to learn how it turns out best for you. But Luo Chun is an immature tea leaf, and it has a little bit more delicate nature than our more commonly existing oolong teas here in Taiwan. So quick view of the leaves dried. They have a nice even highlight of white and slightly yellow. That's showing some of the very tender stem material, but more so of the youngest leaf on these combination of 2 or 3 leaves and a bud. Sometimes only 1 leaf and a bud. So the bud stays, it turns into a kind of light gray or yellowish gray, and then the darker shades are the more mature leaves, but still like not even half grown yet. If we look at the brewed leaves, the coloration is quite consistent. There's a little bit lighter shades, yeah, almost yellow on the leaf buds. Here's an unopened leaf bud. It's kind of in the shape of a needle. And they haven't even turned green yet in their coloration when they're fresh as well. It's an amazing experience, especially with this young leaf growth. When it reconstitutes, you just really get this, you can really see how tender the leaves were when they were picked. And it kind of visually gives you a representation of how delicate and fresh this tea is. And it's very important, or I shouldn't say very important, but if you want the best Luo Chun, it's during the first 2 weeks of spring harvest. That's almost a given. So it's something about the plants when they first start producing, their chemical compounds, their composition is different from once they start getting picked and they're producing leaves faster to kind of compensate for having their new growth picked. That the composition is different after the first couple of weeks, or at least a month of picking. So these leaves were picked in early March, I believe. We went up on March 13th or March 12th, and they were picked the day before. So within the second week of March, it was a little bit late up there this year as well. And that's the Luo Chun is definitely the first of spring tea in general here in Taiwan. And it takes a while before other tea leaves are mature enough to start being harvested. So there we have it. Early spring Luo Chun 2023. We haven't shared this with the tea club in 3 years. I was surprised when I went back to check on that. The last time we shared an early spring or a Luo Chun with the tea club, it was spring 2020. So we're happy to have this to represent a very significant but very small, it's a very small percentage of the overall tea that is produced in Taiwan, like maybe 1 or 2%, I'm guessing. It's a very small area. They're family-run farms. It's a historical district that has preserved some of the deep roots of tea culture here in Taiwan. Check it out. Please leave your comments in the comment sections of our blogs or the tasting video on YouTube. We love to hear what you think about this tea, and we'll see you next month.